Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts Sam Foote
and Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 6 of season 4. Sam and I had a discussion recently around passwordless authentication. We dived into what it is and how it can benefit an organization's security posture. Here are a few things we covered. What is passwordless authentication? What are the benefits of introducing passwordless to your organization? And what does Microsoft Entra ID provide for passwordless? It's a really great episode, so without further delay, here's the episode.
Hey Alan, how you doing?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Anything exciting happened to you this week, Alan?
Probably wasn't nothing too much this week, but we had some announcements last week, I think it was, around Azure AD.
Oh yeah, tell us more, Alan.
Tell us more. Yeah, so we've seen Microsoft Entra sort of become the name for that product suite, and Azure AD was part of that. And Microsoft have now, after it's probably been a year now, actually, thinking about it, from that sort of announcement. They're now moving Azure AD, rebranding Azure AD to Microsoft Entra ID.
Wow, so it's finally
Joining the club.
Yeah, it's finally completely consumed Azure AD, right? Because Entra's, it's been its own separate thing, hasn't it? Entra.microsoft.com, right? And it still is a lot of what Azure AD has been, right? And it still remains to be that. But I think this is a real, a real push to solidify sort of the identity side of Azure into one sort of cohesive, name, if that makes sense, and catch-all for, those various products that are there.
Yeah, well, it's kind of how Microsoft branded some of the other products that weren't just about Azure, because I guess Azure AD it's in Azure, it's for Azure, it's only that sort of thing. And we had Azure Security Center moved to Microsoft Defender for Cloud. I think this is kind of taking the Azure name out of it as, in effect, bringing it into the Entra side of things. So, one thing to note is that the capability is identical. It's just in effect a naming rebrand at the moment. APIs, login URLs, PowerShell commands, all that sort of stuff isn't changing.
Lots of the Microsoft website hasn't changed yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a bit of a slow transition. I think they said somewhere around like October times when we'll see some proper changes, but some bigger visible changes to naming around everywhere. But one of the main things as well is all the licenses are changing their name, as you can imagine. So you've got things like Azure AD Premium P1 is now just being called Microsoft Entra ID P1. So they're just losing the premium name there out of it. And P2 is exactly the same, Microsoft Entra ID P2. And then the Azure AD external identities is moving to Microsoft Entra external identity. So it's fairly simple, he says.
Yeah, well, we've seen some of the other sort of sections that were sort of within or around Azure AD previously move out to sort of Entra, haven't we? Like, what was it that we were looking at? Sort of joined devices and hybrid joined devices. It's now Microsoft Entra joined devices, not Microsoft Entra ID joined devices. So we have seen also a bit of a carve out in terms of the sort of identity specific. Didn't they refer to it as sort of ID as the front door in effect, and then with the other sort of solutions as part of the sort of the Entra suite, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I think it was something like that.
Yeah, and what was interesting is that obviously when Microsoft rename things, there's always sort of vocal feedback that comes back, because Microsoft does have a tendency to rename things. But what I thought was interesting is a lot of people were highlighting that the original Azure AD name didn't make a lot of sense, because it's not Active Directory in Azure, is it? It is a completely separate thing, and I hadn't seen it, but I saw quite a lot of messages around that was quite confusing for a lot of people. The word AD there. So in some ways, it's kind of nice that we've got a clear, sort of really clear segmentation of what this cloud identity system is, over Active Directory and other technologies like that.
Yeah, and I think it probably was close to when it first came out. It was probably close to being a cut down version of Active Directory AD.
Yeah.
And it's just morphed so much since then. I mean, that was what, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, probably now. It's definitely completely not Active Directory anymore.
No, and that's not necessarily a bad thing either. In some respects, right? I know there's still lots of reasons to keep that tooling in place, right? There is gaps there, but it is a completely different. It's a completely different environment and a different solution to meet that environment. So yeah, I do. It's good that they're now really starting to sort of solidify it into like one thing. We had the Purview rebrand, right? Which at the time, and it's still taking time because there's effectively like 20 different solutions there now.
Yeah.
Under a different, well, they were in different places that needed to be sort of made more consistent in their naming approach, right? And so it's kind of good that they're going through that process, I think, with Entra, and sort of bringing it into one, consistent sort of naming scheme. I mean, personally, I don't like change. I don't want to have to go and update all of our documentation. I'm definitely not looking forward to that. And I still, when I'm on calls, I'm just saying it and then apologizing for it afterwards, because I think it's going to take me a long time to get my head into it, because yeah. But no, it's a definite show from Microsoft that Entra is here to stay, and that's the way that they're moving. So from that perspective, I do like it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so should we dive into passwordless authentication?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Alan, yeah, can you just give us a sort of a brief overview of what passwordless authentication is?
Yeah, so let's kind of talk around authentication generally, I guess, that we've been in a world, we're still in a world, I should say, it's not been, where we, everything needs a password to log into, username, password. Technically, there's nothing wrong with that, but with the world changing, and phishing attacks being more difficult to identify and things like that, it now becomes quite easy for potentially bad actors to compromise those passwords and then try to reuse them in various places. Same thing on a local machine. If they take over the machine, they can compromise the password. Then they can log into other things. So Microsoft probably, I don't know, three years ago maybe started bringing out the let's remove passwords from the world. It's the weakest link. We've seen multi-factor authentication, MFA, come in to be like the extra bit to it to enhance that part. But really, if we can move to something where you don't need to type in a password to get into your account, things like that, it makes the user experience simpler, and it can't be potentially it can't be compromised because you're not actually typing anything in. Nothing on that machine can read it because you're not actually typing anything. And that's the kind of goal I think Microsoft, the world, or multiple things now, a single sign-on. So you don't need a password for various things within Azure AD Entra ID. So it's just in effect, authentication without the need for a password, and that's using potentially 502 keys, other things like Windows Hello, and I've got to think now what else the other thing, and Windows Hello 502 keys and authentication applications as well, where they just they do the key combinations, things like that.
Yeah, and passwords, can be highly secure, and they can be a great defensive mechanism. But we do see a lot of bad practice, with passwords, right? Password reuse, insecure storage. Also, like you say, attack vectors which specifically target credential scraping, on people's machines, and malware, and there's many different attack vectors. So passwords, when used correctly, can be highly secure, can't they? Like you say, billions of people every day, put passwords into systems, and on the whole, that is one way of approaching that problem. But as you say, if you can remove, it almost seems too good to be true. Remove the passwords. So there's a big sort of cultural shift there, isn't there? With that approach, and that can be a little bit scary for people. Change.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it kind of feels like it's less secure in some form because you don't have a password. You're in that mind frame that you need a 16, minimum of 16 character password maybe, which, like you said, is great for security, but from a security health or the password health, like you said, users aren't going to remember it very well. Yes, we try saying it should be a passphrase that you use so you can remember it, but it's not your name of your dog, it's not the name of your cat, etc., or your firstborn, etc. But users won't want to change that often because it also depends on your rotation as well. Maybe you change it once a month and it's 16 characters. Most users aren't going to change the password that much.
What if you
And
think
like you said,
think how many passwords and sites that you have in your personal LastPass? Right. The last time I even looked at the vault, it was over 700 logins on mine, right? Which is a mix of various different things. And some of those, like you say, in sort of enterprise environments, have to be rotated, right? So it's not just the fact of you've got to potentially store hundreds of passwords or remember them, for various different accounts. It's also the fact that every single time you are forced to, refresh that password, you have to have a different version. So it's like you're potentially taking hundreds of passwords with you forward, and so the default, for especially less technically minded users, is to effectively just reuse a password or make very slight variations on that password.
yeah,
Right. And then, or add, like you say, memorable information, and maybe use memorable information about themselves, that is also easily gleaned, by an attacker. Right. So there's multiple sort of potential failure points there. And we've also got like the human aspect of that as well, right? A human is managing that, right? And I think that authentication process, we need to think about what are the weakest links in that chain, right? Because it's like a chain of a process that you need to go through, and and potentially removing us out of that could be a positive thing.
yeah, and we can, like you said, we may have multiple passwords for multiple applications, but we can, outside of passwordless authentication, we can do single sign-on with Microsoft Entra ID, Azure AD, to reduce some of those passwords, that the amount we have, but you've still got then the master password to your account that then has access to the various applications. So then there's more risk. I guess sometimes there's more risk on that account, which means you increase the password length, the security of it, the MFA prompts, etc. So, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, can you just take us through, from a, I suppose, not, maybe not from a personal perspective, but sort of from a, an enterprise or organization perspective, what are the benefits in, removing passwords from your environment?
So going passwordless is a journey. Okay, so you can't today remove the password uh, from your laptop. There are ways around it. There are things you can do, but generally, if you're in an Active Directory domain, you have to have a password majority of the time, um, or at least when you sign into it sometimes. But it is a journey, and the reason, the benefits of kind of introducing it is that you can, these passwordless authentications are not, they're resistant to phishing because there's nothing to phish at that point because there is no password so they can reuse. Um, really talking around, what passwordless is kind of the authentication part of it, and um, then so kind of think about the three things: authentication, something you have, and something you are or know. Um, Passwordless is that part of the authentication, which would be normally your password, and then something you have would be your security key, your phone, your Windows device. And then something that you are or is then your PIN, your biometrics kind of thing. So it's kind of bringing those bits into play at the same time. And what it means is that you don't have to worry too much about users storing their password on a piece of paper when they're going around because it's too long. You haven't got to worry about it not being very healthy, those passwords, because you're right. If they're using the same password they do for their personal accounts and that gets compromised, then there's risk obviously there of then their corporate account being compromised. So bringing passwordless in means that there's a different mechanism for authentication, but also it means that a user doesn't have to then has a different sort of it's not a password, but a different mechanism to sign into your work accounts and things like that, so that they're not using their passwords that they use at home. They're not using their if you allow bring your own, they're not using their Windows laptop to sign into their work account, and maybe their home PC's compromised. They're using password authentication to get in. There's nothing there that can be taken. So from an organization security perspective, it does that sort of slight increase in your security posture because you're making it harder to get the credentials because there are, in effect, there's no credentials to steal per se, apart from on the devices or in the technology that we're using passwordless for. And from the user perspective, they don't have to remember a password. I mean, from a personal perspective, I use passwordless at work. And to be honest, I have to go and reset my password whenever I need it because I don't remember it because it's so irregular that I use it, and there's only a couple of applications where I need to use it that I forget, and I have to. If that it's quicker for me to go and self-service password reset it than use MFA and etc. to get to it.
So are you saying that, to start off with, even sort of an authentication process, like a modern authentication process, let's say that that's using passwords, is still going to have multi levels to that authentication, right? Because you're gonna bundle that with, say, MFA,
Yeah.
right? Some sort of challenge, on that authentication. So are you basically saying that you don't lose a layer of authentication security in effect? You just change it to something else. So you're basically saying, instead of having a password, so if you take the password out and you've just got MFA left, you would then layer on like biometrics on top of MFA to verify, to double verify that the person actually interacting with that MFA prompt is the person that we think it is, as an example. So you still got multiple levels of coverage. It's just it's let's say your fingerprint or your Face ID instead of your password, which again is a unique, a unique hash of your biometrics, I assume, at that point anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So you're using other ways to authenticate that isn't a password, and that could be, number matching and PIN to the phone. So
Yeah.
you're proving that it's you doing it, and then you've got the
Right.
PIN to your phone.
Okay, so you've also got a sort of a session-based challenge, which is it's not just a click of a button or a presence detection. It's also like you say, like you're shown a number on the screen, 11, and you've got to punch that into your app as well, because you've got sort of a real-time session-based challenge there that somebody has to meet as well.
Yeah, and that's there today with with MFA, and that's not necessarily passwordless, but that's just proving that you are there and that you can't just auto approve it stops you from auto approving MFAs because you think it's yourself, kind of thing. So it's proving
Yeah,
that it's
and
you.
and what you're saying is you'd layer those authentication, I'll call them challenges. I don't know what the best way of describing that is, but those authentication challenges on top of each other anyway. So you just add to the pile, and which means that in theory you can take passwords away and keep a really good security posture.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you think about physical security and accessing a room, you use a passkey, don't you? You use your ID to get into a building to let you in, and you have to have that physically on you to get in. And some of them you need that plus a PIN, and if it's super secure, you got to do that and then buy a retina scan, whatever it might be. So it's just kind of reinforcing that a little bit, that you need multiple things to prove who you are, and just in effect removing a password.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. And so what options do we have, inside Microsoft Entra ID? I think I got it right that time. So what options does Microsoft Entra ID provide in relation to, passwordless authentication? How does it, enable that?
Yeah, so like I said, we can't completely remove the password option because it's not there yet, because we need to get more adoption of passwordless. But you're able to use the Microsoft Authenticator app to do passwordless. You're able to use FIDO2 keys, which are physical keys that you plug in and with biometrics, etc. And that's a really good. I really like that experience. And you have Windows Hello, which is built into Windows 10 and 11. That's able to do your password authentication to your cloud, to Azure AD applications and things like that. So they're the kind of ones that are there today, and some of them are really simple to set up and get going, and user experience side of it.
Okay, do you want to jump into, say, FIDO2 keys and just, describe that experience to us?
Yeah, sure. So FIDO2 keys are physical keys, like I said, and they can have, in effect, when you set them up within Azure AD and Microsoft Entra ID, when you go to like the multi-factor section, in effect, it binds your a token to the key to allow you to authenticate when you go to the websites to sign in. But as you set it up, depending on which one you have, you set up a pin on it and and biometrics if you've got a biometrics one. And one of the brands that is probably well known for it is Yubico, so YubiKeys. So quite a lot of theirs do FIDO2. And in effect, when you go to a website, I mean, for FIDO2 keys, it's even better, to be honest. When you turn up to a website, you plug the key in. So you go to portal.azure.com, for example. It asks you to sign in. And at the bottom, it says sign in a different way. Sign in using a key. you press that, and it goes, right, put in your key. So you plug the key in, and it goes, right, okay. If you've just got a PIN-only one, not a biometrics one, it will say, type in your PIN for the key, not for your account, for your key. You get into that key, and it says, right now, on the keys, you have now a place where you have to touch it. And that's to prove that you're there. So someone couldn't just plug it in, walk away. It's to prove that you're physically there and you know the PIN. So it's like those sort of 2 or 3 checks that we're doing. Once you do that, it signs you in. So in that experience, you don't type your username in or your password.
Okay, because it's linked to that key. So, and also with that mechanism, in order for somebody to get into your account at that point, they would need to physically have your key and the code for your key, right?
Correct.
So you would need some level of physical, I'll call it a physical attack. Like, let's hope, touch wood. Let's hope that's not the case. But somebody would have to physically take that key from you, and they would also have to know that code. So there's effectively 2 items there.
Correct. So they might be able to get the PIN code maybe if they compromise the machine, but they can't physically get the device, or they can't touch it to prove that it's you there signing in.
Well, that's a completely different attack vector at that point, right? We're talking about physical, security, right? Like going back to your original example, right? And why, physical, because like some doors, open just by a tap of a card that can easily be cloned, right? But it's definitely another level of sophistication and complexity, to and confidence, I suppose, that's required in order to get physical access to these items, right? And that's a completely different vector. So there, that to me, and the fact that you said that you don't even have to know your username, potentially, right?
Yeah.
At that point, how would you handle like a single? What happens if I had multiple accounts? How would I? Would I put my username in first and then pick my FIDO? Like if I wanted a FIDO for both my work and personal stuff.
So you can add, for the FIDO2 keys, you can have multiple accounts on there, but they have to be different vendors, different applications. So
Right,
it is a
okay.
one-to-one kind of thing, as far as I'm aware anyway. So that you can, cause like for instance, I've got my GitHub account on there, as well as my Microsoft account, my corporate Microsoft account, plus a few other accounts on there. So it's fine it's identities for different applications can be on there because it understands what site to go to, but you can't have multiple accounts for the same service.
So in theory, you might want to have a personal FIDO2 key and a work FIDO2 key, for instance, for your 2 different sides of your identity.
Yeah.
Okay. And you also mentioned Windows Hello. So can you just talk to us about sort of what Windows Hello is and how it's sort of, what's the user experience on that side as well?
So Windows Hello is a feature on Windows 10 and 11. In effect, it was the first probably passwordless that came out, and it allows you to sign into the device without a password. Now, I said previously that one of the passwords is that you can't really get rid of on a device. That is definitely going, and Windows Hello did sort of help with that. But there are still occasions when you need a password in the operating system, especially when talking to Active Directory. So this brings sort of a different concept, and there's quite a few views on whether this is different views on why it's more secure than typing a password in on a device. So the reason why I say that is that on a Windows 10 device or Windows 11 device, you can set a PIN. You can set up face recognition if you've got an IR camera, or you can do biometrics like your fingerprint on there. So what it does is, in effect, it uses when you sign in or when you set it up, it grabs an Azure AD or Microsoft Entra ID token with it when you're signed in and you're hybrid joined or Azure AD joined, I should say. Grabs the token and stores it in the TPM along with in effect your identity for that device into the TPM. And the only way to get to that token is to unlock it with your face recognition, your fingerprint, or your PIN. Now, I've had a few customers say, well, okay, I've got a 16-character password, and now I'm allowing them to use a 6-digit PIN. How is that more secure? And what we've got to remember is that that PIN is only for that device. So if they jumped onto another machine, that PIN wouldn't exist. So someone would have to physically get onto the machine, know that PIN to do Windows Hello, or physically steal the device to then be able to sign in as them. So again, they have to, like we say, you have to have physical access to the device, really. Be able to say, because when you're at the lock screen, it's going to ask you for a PIN, or your face, or your fingerprint. And unless you know the password, which the users never use now because they've done it when they set it up and set up a PIN, there's nothing you can do from an attack perspective. And this, in effect, then, when you're signing on to Azure and things like that, because you've signed into the device, you've done your multi-factor. We know who you are. You've done those checks because you've had to physically be at the device to do it. You need to know something, and that token then goes up to Azure AD as Windows Hello being a MFA, a factor or a multi-factor sort of token goes up. So that means it's seamless going in, and again, you don't need your password because it automatically signs you in. And if you do need to sign in, there's that button about I need to use a key. When you do that, it then goes, well, do you want Windows Hello? Do you want to do your face PIN thingy, or do you want to use your FIDO2 key? So again, that allows you to have access. And one thing I didn't say is FIDO2 keys. You can plug that in and press the button, and it will sign you in as well without needing username and password. So not only is that multi-factor into the cloud passwordless, but that's also access to the device being passwordless, and just rocking up to any device. Maybe you've got hot desking. You plug your FIDO2 key in. It asks you to press the button and type your PIN in or your biometrics, and that's it. You're signed in. Great scenario for that is like I think one that Microsoft always uses is the airport gates for getting onto a flight. When they have to turn up to the gate, they plug in, press the button, they're signed in, get everyone checked into the plane, and then they unplug, log it out, and that's it. They have to know a password. No one can steal. It's probably not written down somewhere because they can't remember it because it's 20 characters long and it's just left on the side. So yeah, Windows Hello has been there for a while, but it's definitely matured. And
yeah, sorry, Alan. If you I think if you play that back, with physical access to sensitive areas in an organization, right, you might have a key fob. I'm thinking about like an office, like a room with a bunch of like box files in it with confidential information, right? And I hope those rooms hardly exist anymore, but I bet you they do, right? So, we might have a key fob that we go into that gives us access, to a room. So even physical security doesn't have that multi-layered approach, does it? Because in theory, all you've got to do is have like a static key that can sometimes relatively easily be cloned, right?
Yeah, in some scenarios, because I suppose you could have a key, a PIN as well.
You could have a key code and things like that, right? So this is very similar to that. You walk up to your workstation, you plug in. There's a challenge there with a code and maybe a tap, and then it seamlessly gives you access to that environment. So yeah, that's obviously really powerful, without a doubt. So also, what about you spoke previously as well about Microsoft Authenticator. So that's that's another concept by itself, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So Microsoft Authenticator allows you to go passwordless because one part of it is that they can, in the app itself, you can do some registration to prove that it's your device, that it's you, and things like that. So when you set up the authenticator and you set up your MFA with Microsoft Entra ID, that's all great. That will do multi-factor authentication, like we said, the PIN checking and things like that. But what you can then do as well is within the settings you can set to passwordless authentication. And what that does is it does some extra checks on your device. It kind of manages the application to prove that it's secure and nothing else can compromise it in effect. And then when you set that up, when you then go to then sign in on a device on Azure AD, as we always not Azure AD, portal.azure.com, you type in your username, click next, and it goes, right, I'm not going to ask for a password. I'm now going to ask your authenticator for the number matching. So I do the number matching, and normally that's it. Now it's going to ask you for your device's PIN. So something that only you know, well, only you should know, I should say, for that, which then proves that it's you and that you're there, and then it will just sign you in. And that's probably one of the potential easiest ones, I guess, to get out, apart from Windows Hello, from your Windows 10 devices and Windows 11. But yeah, relatively simple to set up. And it's probably fair to say that with any of these, you can target who can use them as well within Microsoft Entra ID. So you can trial it with certain users, or maybe only a certain department use it, maybe because you want to keep passwords for maybe a certain area, maybe until you try and test it. So it's really easy to sort of adopt or start adopting passwordless authentication.
How about conditional access? Can you lock it down from that perspective for certain actions requiring
Yeah. So
passwords?
yes, this came in recently that when you look at conditional access and you go to the grant section, you used just to have multi-factor authentication, and then you had app protection, passwords, etc., and all the other sort of types there. But Microsoft added a new multi-factor authentication tab, and for certain applications, you can force certain authentication methods. So one of them is phishing-resistant authentication, which is FIDO2 keys, Windows Hello, passwordless in effect, passwordless authentication. So you could say that if you want to access your HR system that is hooked up to Microsoft Entra ID, you have to do phishing-resistant authentication, or maybe certain users have to do that and not others, depending on what areas of SharePoint they might have, or the files they have, or the department they're in. Maybe finance have to do that.
Exactly. So you can sort of if you do have maybe more sensitive applications and actions that people are performing, you could sort of add a little bit of disruption to the user experience, but make things like gaining access to their desktop nice and simple and quick, right? And then layer on additional checks dependent on what people are wanting to do. So you do have some flexibility about how you deploy these technologies as well, right? It's not just a binary yes or no opt in, is it? You decide the scope of users which are allowed to do this, and also the scopes in which it can be used based on context aware actions as well.
Yeah, and in effect, the users have to do the setup as well. It's probably worth mentioning that, because it's them. It's not something that IT can go off and set up all their FIDO2 keys and then hand them out. It's something that they have to do.
Okay. So Alan, I suppose the sort of $1 million question is how much does passwordless authentication cost?
password authentication technically doesn't cost anything to do, but to get the feature, I guess, you need Microsoft Entra ID P1 or Azure AD Premium P1. We'll keep with we'll use both names because it's still too new. Yes, you need Azure AD Premium or P1 or Microsoft Entra ID P1 to be able to start using it. So you can't use the free tiers of Azure AD, Microsoft Entra ID to do it. So
P1 is business premium and things like that, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
P1 is like M365 E3. It's the if you use conditional access, you can use it.
Okay.
So, and a lot of organisations will be at that level today, because it's been out for quite some time now, and that. So yeah, that's kind of all you need for it. Apart from obviously, if you're buying FIDO2 keys, you're going to have to buy physical devices. They can range between $40 and $90 before VAT, I think. Some of them. So depending on whether you want biometrics or just the pin ones. But yeah, and that, I mean, like I said, I talked about Yubico and YubiKeys, but there are other vendors out there that are doing them now. So, but I think Yubico was one of the sort of first ones to bring them out, and they're pretty cool keys because they're fairly indestructible.
Nice. We like that from a support perspective, right?
Yes.
Definitely. Cool. Is there anything else with passwordless authentication you want to cover, Alan? Anything you think we missed?
I don't think there's too much more to talk about today, but it might be worth maybe if anyone's listening, and I talked about bring your own devices, maybe jumping to season 4, episode 2, where we talked about securing bring your own devices, because this would kind of tie into that you've got your Windows devices at home with access control, and they could use their FIDO2 key to log in, so they don't have to present their password to their potentially compromised device, because you don't know how dirty or how compromised end users' personal devices are.
Okay.
At that point.
Great.
So yeah. So Sam, what's episode 7's?
So I'm gonna take the next episode, and we're going to be talking about Azure automation accounts. So a relatively, I say it's simple to deploy technology that can sort of allow you to automate tasks within Azure. There are there's sort of many different products now in Azure that you can use for automation, and some of them are very similar. They kind of approach it in different ways as well. But I'll be talking about automation accounts, how they can be used, and sort of their feature set as well. Because when you're looking at those different sort of automation solutions, it's sometimes tricky to understand sort of which one you should go for. I think we will do a further episode in actually comparing them sort of head to head. So it's just one singular place for that sort of thought process. But we'll dive into automation accounts.
Okay, great. That sounds good. Okay, so did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple or Spotify. This really helps us to reach more people like you. If you have any specific feedback or suggestions, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Yeah, thanks all.